Welcome to Veda, a space where we explore the deeper truths of human connection, emotional patterns, and real transformation. If you're ready to understand what's really happening beneath the surface of avoidant behavior, you're in the right place. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our membership, where we break down these patterns with clarity, depth, and real insight you won't find anywhere else. Change doesn't always come with noise or big moments. Sometimes it shows up quietly, almost unnoticed. It's in that moment when someone who used to pull away suddenly chooses to stay, even though everything inside them is pushing them to leave. You've started noticing things differently. Not in a desperate or overthinking way, but with a calm awareness. When you've cared about someone who tends to disappear as soon as things feel real, you stop taking everything at face value. You begin to read between the lines. Silence starts to mean something. Distance starts to communicate something deeper. Even the smallest shift in behavior begins to stand out. And lately, something feels different. There's no big confession, no dramatic shift, nothing obvious you can point to. It's subtle, almost fragile. And that's exactly why it unsettles you. Because when you've been close to someone who struggles with emotional closeness, you don't trust sudden intensity. You don't trust big words or quick changes. What you look for is consistency. You look for effort. You try to see if what's happening now is real or just temporary. Here's something most people don't openly talk about. When an avoidant person starts wanting things to change in a relationship, it rarely looks clear or direct. It doesn't come in the form of grand gestures or emotional openness. Instead, it shows up as discomfort, as hesitation, as a quiet inner battle between pulling away and staying present. And if you're noticing that tension, it means something has already started to shift. The first sign is not what you might expect. People with avoidant patterns don't suddenly become expressive or emotionally open overnight. Their system doesn't change that quickly. What actually shows up first is conflict inside them. You might see small pauses where they used to instantly withdraw, a brief moment where they hesitate before going quiet, a slight delay before they pull back. Maybe they reply a bit faster than before. Maybe they stay on the phone a little longer. Maybe they don't disappear as suddenly as they used to. Those small pauses matter more than they seem, because inside them, two forces are clashing. One is familiar. It tells them to retreat, to protect themselves, to create distance. The other is new. It tells them to stay, to not lose this, to not walk away this time. When someone who is used to keeping emotional distance starts choosing closeness, even in small ways, that's not random. That's effort pushing against instinct. It might not look soft or romantic. In fact, it can come across as awkward, unsure, even a bit emotionally clumsy. But the key thing is, they're not leaving. And for someone like that, choosing to stay carries real meaning. You can feel the difference in how things flow. Conversations don't end as quickly as they used to. The emotional walls are still there, but they're not as thick. It's not full openness, but it's also no longer complete shutdown. For someone who built their sense of safety around independence and distance, even a slight shift toward connection is significant. Then something even deeper begins to happen. They start stepping into conversations they would normally avoid. This is one of the clearest signs that something inside them is changing. Avoidant individuals are usually very good at sidestepping emotional discomfort. They change the subject, minimize issues, or turn serious moments into something lighter just to escape the pressure. So when they look at you and say something like, "We need to talk about what happened," that's not casual. That's intentional. Even if they struggle through it, even if they pause, hesitate, or avoid eye contact, they stay in the conversation. They don't shut it down. They don't brush off your feelings. They don't walk away halfway through. And for them, that's unfamiliar territory. For someone who experiences emotional intensity as overwhelming or threatening, staying present in that moment feels like standing exposed, without protection. Every instinct in them is telling them to escape, but they don't. And that tells you something important. It means you matter enough that their usual pattern of avoidance is no longer the only thing guiding their behavior. something deeper is starting to take its place. At this point, something begins to click inside them. They start to realize that constantly protecting themselves might also mean losing you. And when that awareness becomes stronger than their fear of emotional discomfort, their behavior slowly starts to change. Then another powerful shift shows up: accountability. You begin to hear things you may have never heard from them before. Simple but honest statements like, "I know I shut down sometimes," or "I realize I pull away." There's no deflecting, no turning it back on you, no avoiding responsibility. For someone who has built their identity around being self-sufficient and emotionally controlled, admitting this feels like lowering their guard. It means they are no longer trying to appear unaffected. It means they're starting to be honest with themselves first. And when that happens, the dynamic between you changes. You're no longer the only one carrying the emotional weight. There's a shared understanding now. And that awareness is where real change begins. Not perfection, but recognition. You might also notice a difference in how they handle stress. Instead of shutting down or disappearing, they pause. They might say something like, "I feel overwhelmed, but I don't want to push you away." That one sentence alone represents a major shift. Before, overwhelm would automatically lead to distance. Now, there's awareness and an effort to do something different. Another clear sign appears during conflict. Where they once would have gone silent or created distance, they now stay. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if they seem tense, even if they need moments to gather themselves, they don't leave the conversation. They don't use silence as punishment. They don't escape the intensity. And for someone whose system associates closeness with pressure, staying present during conflict is not natural. It's something they're actively working against. You'll see it in small ways: the way they remain seated instead of walking away, the way they try to listen even when it's hard, the way they struggle internally but still choose to stay engaged. Sometimes they might even say, "I want to understand." And even if their voice isn't steady, the intention behind it is real. Then comes another shift that can catch you off guard. They begin to ask about your needs. Not defensively, not as a reaction, but genuinely. "What do you need from me?" Or, "How can I do better here?" For someone who is used to protecting their independence, this is a big step. It means they are stepping outside of their self-contained world and recognizing that your experience matters just as much as their need for space. That's not small. That's real growth happening. It shows they are starting to understand that closeness doesn't erase who they are, that connection isn't the same as losing themselves, that real intimacy requires presence, not distance. If you've been patient, giving them space while still showing care, this shift can feel like something finally opening after being closed for so long. But it doesn't mean everything is suddenly perfect. Growth for someone with avoidant tendencies is rarely smooth. There will still be moments where they pull back, times when old habits show up again, moments where overwhelm takes over briefly. But if you're noticing these changes, the hesitation instead of disappearance, the willingness to have hard conversations, the ability to take responsibility, the choice to stay even when it's uncomfortable, and the effort to understand your needs, then you're not imagining it. What you're seeing is real effort. Effort against patterns that have been there for years. And for someone whose default has always been distance, choosing to stay is one of the clearest ways they show they care. Because when someone who has spent so much of their life avoiding emotional closeness starts choosing presence instead, something deep begins to shift. You start to experience a sense of consistency where there used to be unpredictability. Not perfection, not constant reassurance, but a kind of stability that wasn't there before. The push and pull begins to ease. The constant guessing starts to fade. They show up when they say they will. They follow through. They don't disappear without explanation anymore. And slowly, your own nervous system starts to relax. Consistency doesn't feel dramatic, but it feels safe. It feels steady. It feels like you're no longer waiting for things to fall apart. Even something as simple as your phone lighting up starts to feel different. It's no longer filled with uncertainty, but with a sense of presence. Plans don't feel fragile anymore. You're not bracing for last-minute cancellations or emotional distance. Instead of preparing for their absence, you begin to trust their presence. That shift changes how you experience the relationship. And that kind of change doesn't just reflect attachment, it reflects investment. Then something even deeper begins to unfold. They start letting you see parts of themselves they've kept hidden for a long time. People with avoidant patterns are very careful about what they show. They present strength, independence, humor, control, anything that keeps them looking stable and self-contained. But their inner world is usually protected. The fear, the insecurity, the younger emotional parts of them that learned it wasn't safe to rely on anyone, those parts are rarely shared. So when that wall starts to soften, even slightly, it matters. Maybe they mention a memory that still affects them. Maybe they admit that closeness can overwhelm them in ways they don't fully understand. Maybe they quietly reveal a fear of letting you down. It doesn't usually come as a big emotional moment. More often it comes in small, almost casual sentences. But underneath those words is vulnerability. And for someone like them, vulnerability feels like standing without protection. It feels risky. It feels exposed. That's why they avoid it. It's not that they don't feel deeply. It's that they're afraid of what those feelings might cost them. So when they begin to share those parts with you, what it really means is that trust is starting to outweigh their need to stay guarded. The instinct to protect themselves is slowly being replaced by a desire to be known. They are no longer just managing distance. They are allowing closeness. And that changes everything. You're no longer interacting with a wall. You're connecting with a person who is actively trying to unlearn years of emotional distance. That kind of shift doesn't happen without intention. It doesn't happen without real investment. You may also notice a change in how they respond to your emotions. Where there used to be dismissal, there is now acknowledgement. Before, your feelings might have been brushed off with things like, "You're overthinking," or "It's not that serious." Minimizing was their way of protecting themselves. If your feelings seem smaller, they didn't have to fully face them. But when that starts to change, it's noticeable. They begin to say things like, "I understand why that hurt you." And that matters. Because validation requires presence. It requires them to pause their instinct to defend and actually sit with your experience. It means they are no longer treating your emotions as something to avoid, but as something to understand. You'll hear it in their tone. You'll feel it in the way they listen more, in the way they don't interrupt as much, in how they stay emotionally present instead of pulling away. And for you, it feels different. It doesn't just feel like an apology. It feels like being seen, like finally being acknowledged in a space where you once felt invisible. Because often, the hardest part of loving someone avoidant isn't just the distance. It's feeling like your emotional world doesn't fully exist in theirs. So when that starts to change, something important is happening inside them. Their emotional capacity is growing. They are learning that connection doesn't mean losing control, that understanding doesn't mean they have to agree with everything, that love isn't about winning, it's about staying connected. And then something even more meaningful begins to show. They start including you in their future. Avoidant thinking usually stays focused on the present. Thinking too far ahead can feel overwhelming because it brings up ideas of permanence, and permanence can feel like pressure. Pressure can feel like losing independence. So plans often stay vague, flexible, and non-committal. But when that starts to shift, you'll notice it. Suddenly, when they talk about next month or next year, you're naturally part of that picture. You begin to notice it in the way they talk about the future. Plans are no longer just about them. Now, you're included without it feeling forced. Trips come up with you already in the picture. It's no longer, "I might do this." It slowly becomes, "We could do this." That small shift in language might seem minor, but psychologically, it means everything. It shows you're no longer standing on the outside of their life. You're becoming part of it. Talking about the future doesn't feel vague or distant anymore. It starts to feel grounded, intentional, something real. For someone who once avoided defining anything too clearly, even this level of inclusion carries meaning. It's their quiet way of saying that you are part of their ongoing life, not just a temporary presence. At the same time, something more subtle begins to happen. They start working on themselves, not in a loud or performative way, but in small, noticeable moments. They begin to recognize their own patterns. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause and reflect. You might hear them say something like, "I think I shut down when I feel overwhelmed." That kind of self-awareness doesn't come easily to them. Looking inward means facing emotions they've spent years avoiding. It means stepping outside the identity they've built around control and independence. So when they willingly engage in that process, it signals something deeper than curiosity. It shows they are starting to understand that the way they've always coped won't sustain the connection they want to keep. They may never directly say they're changing for you. People with avoidant tendencies rarely frame it that way, but their actions begin to carry that meaning anyway. They're no longer just reacting to fear, they're starting to understand it. And that's where real change begins. Not in becoming perfect, but in becoming aware. It's important to recognize how rare this kind of shift is. Avoidant patterns don't change because of pressure or emotional intensity. They change when the fear of losing the connection becomes stronger than the comfort of staying distant. So if you're seeing consistency, openness, validation, inclusion, and self-reflection, it's not random. It's intentional effort to maintain the bond. For someone who built their emotional world around independence, choosing growth within a relationship is one of the strongest forms of commitment they can show. Then another layer begins to reveal itself. They start apologizing without being pushed, and not in a vague or dismissive way. Not the kind of apology that shifts blame, but something direct and clear. "I hurt you. I shouldn't have shut down. You didn't deserve that." For them, those words are not easy. It requires letting go of the instinct to protect themselves through excuses. It means sitting with discomfort instead of avoiding it. Admitting fault means acknowledging impact. And acknowledging impact means stepping into emotional responsibility they've often avoided. So when their apologies become genuine, it's not just about fixing a moment. It's about their defenses softening in favor of connection. And when that happens, the dynamic between you starts to ease. Not because the past disappears, but because repair becomes possible. You may also notice something new after conflict. Instead of silence, they reach out. Where there used to be distance, there is now movement, a message, a call, a simple, "Can we talk?" It may not be perfect, but it's an attempt. For someone avoidant, initiating repair means choosing vulnerability over pride. It means facing uncertainty instead of hiding behind distance. It means acknowledging, even internally, that the relationship matters enough to take that risk. And that is not small. Because where withdrawal once felt like safety, now reconnecting becomes more important. When they are the one closing the gap, what they're really saying, even without words, is that this connection matters. Another clear sign of change is how they respond during emotional intensity. When you're vulnerable, when emotions run high, they don't shut down the way they used to. They stay. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not comfortably, but they remain present. They might seem unsure. They might struggle to find the right words, but they don't leave. They don't dismiss you. They don't turn it into something light just to escape it. For someone who is used to disconnecting as a way to feel safe, staying in those moments is a major shift. It means they are learning to tolerate closeness instead of running from it. You'll notice it in small ways. They stay physically close instead of stepping away. They try to ground themselves instead of leaving. Sometimes they even ask, "What do you need from me right now?" That question matters. It shows they are participating instead of avoiding, even if they're still learning how. And when this begins to happen consistently, it's not just a phase. It's change happening at a deeper level. You'll also see a gradual opening. Not big emotional confessions, but small pieces. Memories, fears, insecurities they usually keep hidden. For someone avoidant, opening up isn't about intensity, it's about consistency. One vulnerable moment can happen by accident, but repeated openness is a choice. It means they are building trust instead of retreating from it. When someone who values independence starts sharing their more fragile side, it often means the fear of losing you is becoming stronger than the fear of being seen. Then, something even more direct begins to surface. They admit their fear of losing you. Simple words like, "I don't want to lose you," carry weight because they break through the usual emotional distance. For someone who has always relied on themselves, Saying that means stepping into real vulnerability. It means acknowledging that you matter in a way that creates emotional risk. You'll also notice shifts in how they see themselves. That belief of, "I don't need anyone," starts to soften. You might hear things like, "I like having you around," or "It feels better not doing everything alone." They may sound small, but they're not. They show that their identity is slowly changing. Connection is no longer something that threatens them. It's becoming something that adds value to their life. Their behavior also starts to reflect more of a partnership. They consider your needs, they adjust plans, they compromise, they ask what works for you. For someone who equates control with safety, learning to compromise is a big step. It shows a shift from thinking only about themselves to thinking about the relationship as a whole. They also begin to show up even when it's not easy. When they're tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, they don't disappear like before. They stay engaged, they call, they show up. At some point, you realize something has changed. You're no longer chasing their presence, you're receiving it. Another meaningful shift is in how they express themselves. They start putting feelings into words. "I appreciate you. You make things better for me." For someone avoidant, saying those things matters. It removes the guesswork. You're no longer trying to read between the lines. You're being acknowledged directly. And finally, the most important sign of all. They're uncomfortable, but they're still trying. Real change doesn't look smooth. It's messy, inconsistent, sometimes awkward. But the difference is, they keep coming back. They pause, but they don't disappear. They struggle, but they don't walk away. They feel overwhelmed, but they stay connected. That's what real change looks like. Not perfection, but persistence. If they are choosing to stay instead of pulling away, choosing connection instead of escape, even imperfectly, then something real is happening. They're not just attached to you, they are changing within the relationship. And that kind of change always comes at a cost. It means letting go of the version of themselves that felt safest being alone. Real change isn't proven through words or promises, it's shown through consistency. And when someone who used to run starts choosing to stay, starts opening up, starts showing up even when it's difficult, it means something inside them is shifting. Not all at once, not perfectly, but genuinely. And that quiet, steady effort is where true transformation begins. Real change isn't loud or perfect. It's quiet, consistent, and often uncomfortable. When someone who once chose distance begins choosing presence again and again, it speaks louder than any words ever could. It means fear is no longer in control, connection is. And if you're witnessing that shift, understand this. You're not just seeing effort, you're seeing someone slowly rewrite who they've always been. That kind of transformation is rare, and when it's real, it changes everything.